Hello everyone, this is the great Lord and Master, Oseron, the Eternal. Okay, this is going to be part 4 of the Proof of God series, and this is huge, what I discovered yesterday and today. Alright, the first thing I want to do though, is I want to clarify something in relation to how these single digits come into being in the first place. See, I had some comments on another video where people didn't understand that the single digits 1 through 9 come from nature itself, not from man. So there was a person arguing with me that was saying, oh no, this is because man made it up and that's why it's like that. That's not the case, and I want to show you right now how the single digits 1 through 9 were established from nature in the first place, with some help from the I Ching, the Chinese book of change. Okay, what we see here, excuse the bad lighting and odd the weirdness. What we see over here on the left is a bunch of lines, broken solid lines. And this is the heart of the I Ching. These are called trigrams. And each one is made of 3 lines. And what those lines represent is basically polarity. Okay? And you see over here, you see one solid line, that would be called a yang line. And then a broken line over here, which would be called a yin line. For yin and yang, obviously. And then the combination of those two produces the Tao, basically the Tao. Yin and yang combined. But now, yin and yang combined alone produce a stasis. There's no movement because they're perfectly balanced, so there is no movement yet. Movement doesn't become a reality until you have imbalance. So you add one more of these lines to create imbalance, and that's why it becomes a trigram. Then you get motion. And then all of the possibilities, all the possible combinations of yin and yang in a trinary form produce 8. You got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So up here you have all the yin lines solid, and then you have its opposite, all the yang, and so on and so forth. And all the possible combinations of yin and yang in the trinary form produce 8. So where does 9 come from, you're saying? Well, 9, as I've explained in the first videos, is the sigil for God itself. It's the perfect number. It's the divine number. Everything else can exist without it, but 9 becomes invisible on its own. There's no movement with 9. So now, again, you have to watch the first video in this, the first 3 videos in this series to really know where I'm coming from with this. But they're not very long and they're pretty interesting. So that is how we get the numbers established for 1 through 9. And then the I Ching, the completed hexagram, they're called, is born from 2 trigrams, and then the whole of the I Ching is 64. All of that equals to 64 hexagrams, and then 64 reduced becomes 10, which becomes 1. So again, 10. I got to add here because this may come up again, but 10 is a funny number because 10 is a 1, but it has a value of 0. And I want to show you more on this shortly, maybe even now. I'm sort of just going off the top of my head here. But if you watch the 3rd video, which is a very important one, it shows how the single digit code, once you establish that once you establish why we use 9 single digits and not like 13 or 14 single digits, because again, there's a reason why it is 9 single digits and not some other arbitrary number. Once you establish that fact, then the single digit matrix itself, the single digit matrix itself validates those findings with the oscillation construction patterns as I showed in the first video. You see those four shapes? Those are produced by each of the times tables, going forward and backwards, and they cancel each other out with 9. And that's why 9 has to exist. And again, if you watch the first video, the first Proof of God video, I cover this chart in depth. And then if you're wondering what the chart on the third video comes to, the grid, this is what it makes. Watch the video for a better drawing, but this is what you get. You get a grid of worlds that all reduce to 9, and then you have a single grid in the middle that is represented by 369, producing a square grid. Now, what the nature of this video is going to show is taking that two-dimensional image and turning it into a three-dimensional cube that represents actual physical life. This is where it gets crazy, okay? Now over here, can you see that? Over here I have the single digits drawn out in a square. And this is going to tell you how the cube has to be constructed. So you go one way, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, then down. And then you go down from 9 down to 1 to create a square. And you can't do that any other way to create a balanced square. And the same thing applies to the cube. The cube can never exist as a complete entity without taking two separate two-dimensional grids and mashing them together, and then the cube comes to life. You can't make the cube going only one way, forward or backwards. And then this is where the postulation from Walter Russell comes into play. One of Walter Russell's many postulations was that time moves forward and backwards simultaneously, but we as beings only experience time moving in one direction. That's why we feel life, it feels like we're living a life. But in actuality, what happens is, and this is where it gets hard to fucking process in your mind, but really what happens is our entire life, our birth, life, and death all happened in a single instant. And basically all we're doing is recalling the memory of life as we live. It's crazy to wrap your head around that. But the cube is the same way. You can't create a three-dimensional cube using these numbers going only in one direction. You have to combine them. As soon as the combination is made, then it springs to life. Okay? And I'll show you how I checked all this to make sure it does form a congruent cube, and it does. So then what you do is now you've got the square, and in the middle of here you're going to see a cube, and a cube itself can be represented by 369. In occult circles, a cube is often represented as 666, and I know that is valid, but offhand I forget exactly why it is 666, but it is. Because I know there's something, like the nature of physical matter reduces to 6662, but offhand I can't explain it right now, but I will show you how it represents 369. Okay, we got the cube. The cube has 8 corners plus 1 center point, and that produces 9. Okay? Then the cube has 6 faces. And then the cube also has 10 connecting lines. 12 connecting lines, and 12 reduces to 3. So that is how the cube can be represented as 3, 6, and 9. And on that grid that I showed you, I'll show it again, the circled lines there are all 369, and that represents a 369 grid. And that same grid, that same grid still maintains its integrity in a fully congruent cube too, and I'm going to show you how that happens. Okay, yesterday when I first was making these discoveries, it was because of this cube that I started pondering this. Or a different cube, actually, but the cube in general. It's because of the cube that I started pondering this. And what I figured out was, if you take that grid and push it into itself, going forward and backwards as time does, every single number on that grid turns into a 10. Okay? Right here. So 9 plus 1 is 10, and so on and so forth. You can see it. You know, 8 plus 2, 7 plus 3, 6 plus 4, on and on it goes. It all becomes 10. And 10, as I explained, is a funny number because it's 1. It takes the place of 1, but it has a value of 0. So it's not really perfect, as Pythagoras thought, as the Jews thought, or the Hermeticists thought. 9 is the real perfect number, not 10. So any people who are Kabbalists and know about the tree of life, the real proper way to write Kether as a digit would be 0, 1, not 1. It would be 0, 1. And then, of course, Malkuth, which is the kingdom, is represented as its reflection as 10. That's why that gets like that. And then it turns into 10, so I was all excited yesterday when that happened, but then I was trying to turn that into a three-dimensional cube, and you can't do it. You can't turn the grid into a three-dimensional cube without adding 0. And let me explain something about 0. 0 is a number or a state that can't exist without awareness. So the state of 0, it's impossible for 0 to know itself as 0 without becoming conscious of itself, and by default that automatically turns 0 into a 1. As soon as 0 becomes conscious of itself, it becomes a 1. That's why you write 0, 1. So, but for true 0 to exist, it would never know it, because and nothing would know it. We can't know what 0 is because we're conscious. Because we're conscious beings, so it's impossible for us to know what 0 is because we are 1, and 0, the state of 0 then becomes a 1 as well. It has to. So when you're turning this into a grid, you have to account for 0. You have to, because 0 doesn't really exist and it takes up a space as 1, so you have to assign it a space mathematically. Okay? Still follow? And this is what this is. I sort of broke down a section of the grid into a cube just to make sure the numbers were congruent. And I did, and this might be hard to follow because it hurt my brain to do it. But now you're going to add 0. And once you add 0 to this, you get 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Then, when you push it into itself forwards and backwards, it reduces to 9 again. Everything reduces to 9, including the 369 grid. Because as you would see if you watch the other video, part 3, the 369 grid, everything reduced to 9 except for certain sections of the grid, they stayed 3-6. But when you push it into itself forwards and backwards, everything turns to 9. Everything turns to 9. Every aspect of it turns to 9. And this is what is shown here. So you need to account for 0 when you construct a cube. So that's why, so what you see here, I know this is tough, but you're seeing a cubed form of that grid broken down in separate sections. So here's the face of the cube and the top of the cube. Here's the first plane of the cube right here, which would be represented by all zeros. Here's the second plane of the cube taken out of the cube, and it's showing the numbers 1, 2, 3, 2, 4, 6, 3, 6, 9. And then the third plane of the cube has the zeros, and then it's 2, 4, 6, and then 4, 5, 3, and on and on. And then here's the fourth section of the cube. But now, one thing that you have to understand with this cube, the cube is not going to work unless you, again, push it together forward in time and backwards in time. And then what happens when you do that is every single internal number on this thing is in a constant state of flux. It's always energetically moving. Okay? And this is what you get. And the energetic oscillations are shown by these four circular shapes here. These are the varying levels of oscillation. And that's what happens to the cube. So the cube, so once you create a cube out of that grid, it's a complete energetic dynamic activity. Everything is moving. And what happens is the wall of zeros that are here turn into nines. Okay? Everything turns into nines. Everything turns into nines, but this wall of zeros that is sort of a paradox turns into nines as well. Everything turns into nines. And that is how you turn the single-digit 9 code into a three-dimensional cube that is in a constant state of dynamic flux. And it's mathematically congruent. But it's really hard to fucking... You can't draw it static. You can't create the cube in a static form because it doesn't work. Those numbers are in constant oscillation. So the static cube can't exist. It has to be dynamic. It can't exist as a static entity. It must be dynamic. Yeah. So that is that. So I don't think I left anything out. I hope you understand. I know this is kind of hard. This is a tough one, and you got to really ponder it yourself to see what's going on. But that is how you turn a two-dimensional single-digit 9 code into a three-dimensional cube that represents life. And it also shows you that life is an instantaneous expression that happens all at once, that the entirety of our lives happened in a single instant, and we're only remembering one directional flow of time as it goes on. It also shows you that 10 isn't really the perfect number, 9 is. And let me clarify that a little more. Because for 10 to be the perfect number, it can't have two digits, because a perfect number is a single digit, as 9 is. But the 0, 1, and 1, 0 take two digits to create, and that is yin and yang. So the 0, 1 and the 1, 0 is a representation of yin and yang. The 9 is a single digit, and it represents basically the same thing using one digit. It's the combination of everything at once. It's everything and nothing simultaneously expressed as a single digit 9. And if you look into this, I mean, the presentations I've demonstrated so far are only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the magic and beauty of 9. 9 truly is the sigil for God that has all of the powers of omnipotence within the sigil itself. 9 it's absolutely mind-blowing what 9 is and how powerful 9 is as a number. So that should be it. Thanks for your attention, and more on the way.